Welcome to Advantage. I'm your host, David Young, and I hope your week has been a good one. This week's been great for me. I actually got an opportunity this week to present. I get to present at a conference every now and then, and I got to present at a conference that I haven't been to in a long time. It was the Kentucky School Boards Association conference in Louisville. Of course, you all know I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure, but local school board members are really, really important to our school districts. And I think sometimes they get a little lost in the shuffle because they typically aren't there during the school day. They have their meetings in the evening. But gosh, they can have such a big impact on what's happening in our school district. They are major decision makers. They typically come from outside education, which is really a valuable thing because they bring that perspective of the community. And so I just think with our board members, we have a lot to learn from each other. I know they want to learn more about our schools and districts and what happens on a day-to-day basis. I think it's really important that we learn from them. So that's why I put in to present at that conference because I wanted to get to know some of our school board members across the region and the state a little bit better. And so I had a great experience there. At that conference, my friend, my associate director at CKEC, David Morris, and I, um, we talked to them about 10 strategies that provide an exponential return on investment in both academics and district finances. And I was just impressed by the questions that they had afterwards and the feedback that they gave us. So I say all that to say, if you haven't thanked one of your local board members lately for dedicating the time they do and the support that they give to your district, be sure you do that when you get a chance. It doesn't pay very much. They're doing it because they have a heart for kids. It's often a job where there are lots of texts and phone calls at night and on weekends, and when you run into people at the grocery store, kind of similar to being a school or district administrator, to be honest. So it can be a thankless job. And so if you haven't thanked a board member lately, a little encouragement with them could go a long way for the efforts that they put in and choose to be a servant in that way. All right. So with that, let's get to today's interview. I mentioned last week uh, how blessed I feel that I get to interview such great guests on Advantage, and today is certainly no exception to that. Um, but my guest today is not from Kentucky, but he has spent some time in Kentucky in the past couple of years because my co-op, Central Kentucky Educational Cooperative, has been fortunate to bring him in to work with teachers and administrators around our region. And I'll just say to you, every time we bring him in, it's a packed house. We typically can't have his sessions at CKEC because we don't have a room that'll hold enough people. And so he is a hit here when he is going to be a keynote speaker for us this year at EduCon. And when we announced that, we had so many people say, "Oh, I'm so glad that you're bringing," and my guest is today, Horacio Sanchez. They said, "I'm so glad you're bringing Horacio back." Let me tell you a little bit about Horacio's background. Horatio is the president and CEO of Resiliency, Inc., which is an agency leader in helping schools improve school climate, instruction, and discipline. Horatio is recognized as one of the nation's prominent experts on promoting student resiliency and applying brain science to improve school outcomes. The Maladaptive Council Academy of Science recognizes him as a leading authority on emotional disorders and resiliency. He's a highly sought after speaker, as I mentioned a minute ago, and he has keynoted many national conferences. Horatio's been a teacher, administrator, clinician, mental health director, and consultant to the Department of Education in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and other states. His diverse education and background have helped him to merge research, science, and practice. Horatio sits on the True Health Council or the True Health Initiative Council of Directors, a coalition of more than 250 world renowned health experts committed to educating on proven principles of lifestyle as medicine. He's authored several articles and books on the topics of resiliency, closing the achievement gap, and applying neuroscience to improve educational practices and outcomes. He's the author of the best-selling book, The Education Revolution, which applies brain science to improve instruction, behaviors, and school climate. Like I mentioned a minute ago, Horatio will be headlining our conference, Central Kentucky EduCon, on June 11th. And not only is he going to do the keynote, he's going to do a breakout session afterward. And we'll talk a little bit about the topics for both of those in a few minutes. But it goes without saying, I feel so fortunate to have him as part of EduCon this year, and I'm excited to talk with him more today. So, with that, Horacio Sanchez, welcome to Advantage. So, Horatio, I've given our listeners some background on you. Is there anything else that you could share, would like to share, that would help them know you, get to know you a little better?
Live by two principles. I got them from my mother, I think, and one of them was be value added. Try when you're ever in an encounter to bring some value to it. And the other thing was, if you can't help, and if you can help somebody, help them. And those two things have served me pretty well.
Absolutely. Uh, I like both of those a lot. I particularly like the idea of being value added. So every time, if you're in a situation, try to make it better, right?
Right.
Very good. So, Horatio, tell us a little bit about your journey in education. What caused you to get into education, and then maybe also, I know you have specialty areas in resilience and neuroscience. So, what also maybe made you go ahead and choose to shift your focus specifically into those areas?
Education is not unique. I think I got here the way most educators get here. I was highly influenced by a teacher, Elaine Timken, in my freshman year of high school, who didn't let me get away with anything and held me accountable and told me I could do better. And so that really impacted my life. And the interesting thing is when I told her this later in life, she didn't understand or didn't have a clue. But that's impactful about how influential teachers can be even when they don't know they're being influential. What got me to resiliency was I became the youngest director of mental health in Wake County. And what we had was a continuum of treatment for the kids. And every school person knows and every mental health person knows there's this group of chronic kids that everything you try fails. And we had a continuum of service. And what we saw was they'll put them into service. The kids will burn out of that service. They'll put them into another one. They'll burn out of that one. They'll put them into another one. And when they exercise the full continuum, they ask the key question, are they 18? If they're not 18, they put them through the same services again. So there were kids that we did not know what to do with. At that time, I had a chief child psych named Eric Vance, and me were both looking at resiliency. And since I was the head of mental health, I decided I was going to make a resiliency model for the most severe kids. And we followed basically what the research showed, which is that you build relationships and you promote protective factors, kids get healthy across disabilities. But we did it with the most severe kids, not with the least severe kids. And we were the first program in the United States to actually apply resiliency as a treatment modality. And we were the first to prove that actually promoting protective factors helps across disabilities. And that's what got me to resiliency. My work in neuroscience is basically came out of my work in resiliency. When we started doing all our research on resiliency, everybody kept on saying, why are these protective factors working? And we partnered with some of the leading researchers at the time and backtracked every protective factor. And in the early days, we found that they improved brain function. And early on, understand, this predates a lot of the technology we have today. So people said we overreached because it can't be that way. It can't be that simple. As of right now, every single study that looks at fMRI or brain research scanning and backtracks protective factors, every protective factor improves brain function. So it was the two things married well.
Wow. So So let me dig in on that just a little bit. This stuff is fascinating to me, and I know it will be to our listeners as well. So you mentioned when you were saying that you all selected the most severe kids, you said build relationships, and it was identify protective factors. Was there another element that you
No, it's
mentioned there?
build relationships and promote protective factors. In the research, there are about 32 protective factors identified in the research.
Okay.
Out of the 32, a percentage of them you can't promote because they're either you have them or you don't because of heredity, like being firstborn is a protective factor.
Okay.
Your whether you're born with a disability, certain things you can't do anything about, but there are
Mhm.
lots of protective factors you can do a lot about. By the way, there's only one academic protective factors in the research. It is reading on grade level is the only true academic protective factor. But it's interesting, surviving school, like being able to graduate and get out of school, is a protective factor. It doesn't
Wow.
matter your grades, it just getting through school is a protective factors. And those are the only two that are strictly educational, but a lot of the other protective factors, educations can build with, like getting along with your peers is a protective factors.
Mhm.
Schools can build that. And so we looked at all the protective factors that schools could achieve and designed them to be in the climate. And that's one of the ways we promote resiliency in schools.
Wow, that is fascinating. Already, we're in this thing 5 minutes, and I'm like, I want to know so much more about that. So, so protective factors that can be built and promoted in schools as part of the culture, and when those are in place, they're proven to improve resiliency and brain function. Right. So
and
I guess
and
I guess
mitigate
brain
and
function
mitigate
and go ahead, go ahead.
and mitigate presenting problems. So we had kids that had diagnosis like conduct disorder or antisocial personality disorders, or they had severe diagnosis. We found out that the protective factors improved those areas also, or at least their life outcome areas. It
Sure.
made their success in school better, it made their success in the community better, it made them be able to have better relationships and enabled them to hold a job. That's what we're talking about. Protective factors make you strong enough to overcome the risk in your life.
Wow, that's fantastic. My goodness. That's information that we all need to know more about in education. So, so let me dig in a little bit when we talk about there are protective factors that you can promote in schools. Um, Let me get on down to the classroom level. Are there particular protective factors that seem to have, the most return on investment, or is it more of an opportunistic type thing where here's an opportunity for us to build this into the culture? It's sort of low hanging fruit in this building, and so
Right.
let's focus on that one.
I think both. All protective factors seem to be fairly equal, with the exception of one. Having a long-term, nurturing, healthy relationship with people is a protective. That seemed to be found in everyone who was resilient. There was no variable there. But other kids had different configurations of protectives. However, based when neuroscience came into play, neuroscience kind of told us that there were certain protective factors that seemed to have big bang for your buck. And for example, having a ritualized, safe environment seems to be a protective factor. But when it comes to neuroscience, that is crucial because if I can improve your environment and if it's ritualized, and the reason ritualized is in there is that when you do a ritual, that means someone's taught you the steps to do it. It happens at a predictable time. When you do a ritual, two things happen. One, it becomes a habit. All habits get reinforcement of dopamine. Dopamine makes you feel better and helps your chemical balance. So if you think about a bunch of kids who come in with less chemical balance, if you promoted that kind of protective factor where you were able to improve the rituals in your school and make your school more predictable, what you take is all the kids who seem to be more vulnerable do better in your environment and you diminish issues. So there are certain ones that we said they're perfect for school and it seems to help everyone.
You know, this feels a little bit like pulling back the curtain and looking behind some best practices that we've always known that were best practices, but little did we know the impact. Like what you just said about, like we've known for a long time that it's good to practice rituals and routines. Um, so that students feel safer and they know what the expectations are. But what you just described was building habits and knowing when things are going to happen actually provide dopamine to your brain, which is a reward, and so it there's and then that feeds, I'm assuming, into resilience and makes your brain function at a
Homeostasis.
higher level. So it
It makes kids more balanced. And I
sure.
think and the kids we have the most problems with, the kids who have long-term imbalance or temporary imbalance. Temporary imbalance would be like a kid goes through a traumatic situation, like their mom died. They may be a very healthy kid, but may go through a period of imbalance. But you're hoping to get out of that. We found out that for the kids who have a bunch of chronic issues, or the kid who's going through something temporarily, if they go into an environment that actually promotes this kind of resiliency, kind of predictable routine environment, just walking into the building can improve their chemical disposition because it becomes a safe place, because their body starts predicting when things will happen. And one of the things we found out about your brain is when you have a ritual that happens around the time, your brain actually plays the ritual subconsciously really fast before it's supposed to happen. When it plays it, your motor neurons actually move like you're doing it. So every time a ritual happens in school at a predictable time, even the kid who's sitting there going, I'm not doing it, in their brain, they're doing it. And so you will win it by attrition, but we get too caught up with the kid who isn't doing it rather than saying, if I can get most of the kids to do it, I will win. And that's where we have to live.
Wow. So that kind of leads me to a related topic that I wanted to mention, and that is the mindset of the adults in the building. I spend a lot of time in schools, and what I find are adults who are there who love children, who are there for the right reasons, who want to come in and work hard. But there's so much to be said for the mindset that we as the adults have, and the behaviors that we choose for ourselves and the impact that that has on the school and then also um, the students. So, I just wonder, as you work with teachers and as you work with schools, is there a is there a mindset change that the staff has to have in order to start to put some of these things in place and think differently about our, as I say, looking behind the curtain, it makes, I mean, to me, that's a realization that would make me think differently about my behavior, or at least know why the things that work. So I just wondered, any thoughts you have on that?
Well, I think one of the mindset places when I became an administrator, one of the places we had to really make a shift was in the concept of discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be fair. I went to school, and my understanding of discipline was in school was this: you did something wrong, and maybe you could get a detention if it was mild enough. I knew there was a suspension after detention, and if you did something really bad, you could get expelled. So my understanding of discipline was how people responded to behavior. Well, roll it forward. When I became an administrator, most of my adults' understanding of discipline was what you did in response to behavior. Well, neuroscience tells us, although that's true, that's an aspect of discipline. It's not enough for most people who are vulnerable. And here's the reason why. You're usually disciplining some degree of impulsive behavior, whether it's a mild one that gets a kid at detention, like walking in late. That's impulsive. It's like, I refuse to get there on time. But a kid who throws a desk over, that's a different level of impulsivity. But impulsivity says a behavior that we didn't expect to occur occurred. Now, what neuroscience tells us is this: if I have a kid who has chemical imbalance based on, let's say, they have diagnosed issues, like they have multiple things, like they're depressed, or they have ADD, or they have ADHD, or they have those things say, I already have a level of chemical imbalance. You can also have you also have some temperaments that you're born with that inherently give you a higher level of imbalance. For example, anxious temperaments. People who are kind of anxious, they come with a level of imbalance. And then you have those temporary things that people are going through a temporary crisis. During the crisis, you experience imbalance. Now, what we know about this is that your brain's supposed to work like this. This part of your brain, your big old prefrontal cortex, has a lot of connections to the part of your brain that controls your emotions. When this is stable, you control most of your emotions and you do it fairly well. You may have some outbursts like losing your temper or yelling and things, but you're not throwing desks around or you're not beating people up. Okay. Now, that is the experience of most healthy people. They control most extreme things and have some minor flare ups. But if I come with a level of chemical imbalance, what we now know is that it takes less to cause me to reach a level of chemical imbalance that produces impulsivity. So let's go to the kid that everybody will accept this with. You have a kid with severe autism. You know, and I know you can change one thing in their routine and they can freak out. And we go, oh, I understand that because they're so vulnerable. Well, all the kids on the continuum of behavior have different levels of vulnerability to chemistry issues. So that's why we have some kids acting out because this kid said something, while other kids can hear the same kid say something and just get a little upset, or some kids not be bothered at all. So one of the things we know is that the level of things that can trigger behavior in school is wide, not narrow. And so we know the issue is that people are coming in with chemical imbalance. And if we can make our school a place that reduces issues, we're better off. So most of my investment in behavior ends up being this: preventative. I want to prevent behaviors from occurring because if I can have less of it, and if I can have it happen wider in space, everyone's wins. Kids get healthier and adults are happier. So the investment is in behavior. So I have to get teachers to understand, like the first thing we talked about. If you can invest in the school climate, ritualize it, and do a really good job with that, we win. We've addressing behavior in a preventative way. Then the other thing we know is this whole brain of ours has a thing called a social brain. That means there's regions and systems in our brain that are only dedicated to how do we interact with each other. And there's things the brain does automatically in those interactions. So we had to get our folks to start to realize that kids monitor, whether they know it or not, each other and the adults to determine, one, are we safe with you? And are we liked by you? And so our attitudes, what we do with our bodies, what we do with our face, hands, posture, gestures, and tone of voice contribute to my climate. So if I can get teachers to understand those things, they will invest more time in ritualizing, and they will try to make sure that they promote the right affect and the right behaviors to build enough relationships, because those two things are chemical in kids' brains. If I have a teacher that has good relationship with kids, if we looking in their brain when they walked into the classroom and they see the teacher, we now know oxytocin goes up a little. Well, oxytocin is supposed to be a bonding hormone, but guess what else oxytocin does? Oxytocin goes up a little. Guess what goes down? Cortisol. Think about your school. If you had most people having good social behaviors and good social relationships, walking into the place will make you feel better because you're triggering cortisol. Walking into a place that's ritualized makes you feel better because you feel safe and you know what's going to happen at certain times. So then your place gets better. This is not new for you, right? Think about the places you like walking into, and I bet you there are two things. There are people you like, and the place is highly predictable because we all need the same things. It's just we may have the capacity to survive in a less predictable place, but we will thrive in a less predictable place, even if we're healthy. We might be able to deal with a place where most people don't get along, but it's still not going to be healthy for us. It'll still bother us, but we have a better chemical disposition, so we can take a little more of that. But we have a lot of kids, and we also have a lot of adults, by the way, that need those two things. And if we can get people to understand how important they are and invest in it, we find a lot of the behaviors that we would have been dealing with regularly, we don't deal with as much. So prevention is where it's at, and we can get them to believe in that. That's our foundation.
Wow. Love it. Thank you for sharing that. I look forward. I know that isn't exactly our topic that is coming up at EduCon. I do want to talk about that a little bit, but goodness, I encourage everybody who's listening. Horatio has lots of resources out there that really dig into the things that we're talking about right now, and I think it can just be so valuable for us as leaders and for teachers to learn more about. So let me switch over and talk a little bit about EduCon. So at EduCon, you're going to do two sessions for us. One is our keynote session, and then you're going to do a breakout session after that on two different topics, and they're fairly new topics. So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on those. One of them, the keynote, is going to be about the emerging research about technology and use of technology and the impact that it has on our brain. And then in the breakout session, science of reading is so popular; it's kind of sweeping the country. And but your breakout session is about the brain science behind the science of reading. So a little bit, it makes me again think about looking behind the curtain, of the science of reading. So I don't want you to give too much away because I really want people to come to the conference and hear about those. But can you talk a little bit about each one of those topics?
Sure. One of the problems with technology is that we all interact with so much that we don't even have a clue how much we're interacting. And so there was, if I ask most people, are they having a too high a level interaction with technology? Are they using technology too much? Is the screen time overwhelming? I think most people would say no. Um, there was a research study that looked at adolescents, and they put an app on their phone, and this app tracked every time they were actively engaged in screen time. So let me explain that. If they were on social media, if they were engaging in texting, it logged the time. But it didn't log the time if they were listening to music, or it didn't log the time if they were actually watching a movie, because those things are slightly different. So just log the time of their social engagement and screen time on their phone only, nothing else. Then at the end of a 3-week period of monitoring, they would ask the kids to self-report how much time do they perceive they're spending a day engaging in screen time. 80% of the kids reported that their screen time usage was 2 hours or less per day. Here's what the app found. Their usage was 5 hours or more a day. Why is that significant? Because what is too much has been a little bit quantified, at least with relation to the phone. Researchers started tracking phone usage and screen time. And if you hit this 5-hour mark, which is now a magic number, guess what we now know? There are 5 new or negative impacts of that technology, interacting with technology with that to that level, like 5 hours of screen time daily, has on your brain that are significant, can become long-term and permanent, and have long-term ramifications. These findings all have big ramifications on education. So basically, here's the tease and here's the reason. Most healthy kids qualify as 5 hours a day or more. We were shocked at that. 80% of the kids in the study were 80% or more, but if you talk to them, are you using it too much? Oh, no, about 2 to 3 hours a day. They weren't even close. They were at 5 to 7 hours a day. So it's safe to say that most of the things that we're finding about technology in the brain is no longer, we used to think it only applies to the chronic user. And when we say chronic, we were thinking 10 to 20%, right?
Mm-hmm.
The chronic user is probably closer to 80%. So I think educators need to know how it's impacting kids' brains. And we have to then adjust, and we also have to teach, because we have to do both things, because we not only have to adapt to how to help them, but we also need to help them have a better level of understanding so that they can also self-correct some of their behavior. Now, the science of reading, I'll give you one tidbit that most people don't know. Your brain basically starts out struggling to read. So we see a lot of activity in the right hemisphere. It switches over to the left hemisphere when we get the foundations of reading become easier for us. So we start getting good at reading. It switches over to the right hemisphere. When it switches to the right hemisphere, the thing that increases is comprehension. Now, if you think about reading, that's the only purpose of reading. You read to comprehend. If you don't comprehend, what's the use of reading? The switch comes between the third to sixth grade. Okay, so let's see what happens in real life at schools. Right around the third grade, the literature is getting a little bit more difficult, and the teachers are asking more comprehensive questions. Not what is the color of Bob's dog? They're asking comprehensive questions. So here's what's happening in class. You got a non-reader, a slow reader, a struggling reader on one side, and you have a kid who's crossed over, whose brain is really have high activity on the right hemisphere. That means their energy is going for comprehension. So we're both reading the exact same thing, and this person is giving answers, and I'm wondering where the hell is she getting the answers from, because I'm reading the same thing, but I'm not getting that. Mm-hmm. So I come back at the fourth grade, and the literature is getting more difficult. The questions are getting harder. And then we have a group of kids who've crossed over, and guess what? They're answering these questions, and I'm reading the same stuff they're reading. I'm getting through it, but I'm not getting it. At that point, if that happens enough, most of the kids who are struggling and who are just reading for getting through the words in the passage start to not like reading, or start to feel stupid. And then one or two things happens. One, they lose motivation, because what motivates the brain is success. And if they tend to be more chemically imbalanced, they will either shut down, or they may become aggressive even and say, I'd rather have a behavior problem than not reading. So this transition in the 5,000 years we've been reading, and our brain is designed to cross over right around third to sixth grade. So that means the crossover is critical. Here's the problem. In America right now, third grade, we average 1/3 of kids reading for comprehension. Oh, by the way, in the fourth grade, guess what our average has gone up to? Still 1/3.
Oh, wow.
And think about it. Every time this crossover becomes critical, and if we don't get enough kids crossing over early, we end up with a lot of more kids saying they don't like reading, or they don't want to engage in reading, or if they're going to read, they're going to be very fundamental readers. And if we start to look at it, the world has noticed, because I listened to a comedian the other day, and his jokes was, well, if you want to hide something in America, put it in the book. And I heard another comedian a week ago said, we don't read in America. And the reason this is getting out there is because we're having a higher number of people who have no desire to read. And I think it goes back to this thing of comprehension. Comprehension makes reading valuable. If my comprehension isn't deep enough, then reading means nothing. So we now know that we as educators are on the clock, and we need to get kids to cross over. Our percentage is extremely low for a developed country. And if we don't do a better job with getting kids to read when they're supposed to and get them to comprehension, we get more people just quit and don't want to read. The beautiful thing about the session is it will tell them, here are the specific things that if you can promote, kids will read. That clear. And it'll be good, well based on science. So I'm hoping people will come, get the information, because remember, reading is one of the only protective factors. And if you can understand that, there's a quote that says, in our society, the quality of life is in large part determined by literacy. And if we think about that, it holds a lot of truth, doesn't it?
Does. Wow. So I can't wait to hear more about that. You're speaking my language. I started out as a first grade teacher, and then I taught second grade, and before I became a principal, I taught third grade for a few years, and back then we used to talk about the switch from learning to read over to reading to learn.
Right.
And we talked, and I think that's what you're describing there,
Exactly.
from learning to read to reading to learn. And when I was a third grade teacher, we kind of targeted that age is the age when that starts to happen. So I think we were on the right track. But that
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that we had it solved. I can remember those two kids being in my classroom, and one, they're reading the same thing. They're both getting through the material, but one of them understanding the reading at a
Right.
much deeper level than the other, and so that is going to be really good for our folks to hear. So looking forward to it. Horatio, as we start to wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners today? Something that we haven't talked about, but something that maybe you hope we would, or something that you want to share with them?
I have a desire for most educators to hear one statement. If you think about different fields in America, almost every field in America has incorporated neuroscience,
Mhm.
whether it's advertising or even the meat industry. Everybody's incorporating neuroscience. Um, I believe education and neuroscience are merging. The days of it no longer applying to classrooms and being distant and are gone. I really encourage almost every teacher to have a minor in neuroscience. Go study it, because the reality is that we're looking at a point where our whole society is going to have a big foundation in neuroscience. And if we as educators aren't at the forefront of that, we'll be talking to people who are going to talk to us about why are some of the things we do don't align well with the neuroscience that everybody knows. And I think it's better for education to be at the forefront of that, leading it, than rather being reactive to it and then having to adjust quickly. And the problem to me, when you're reactive, we usually make bad policy decisions. When we're leading it and we're calm and we're the forefront, we can design the conversation, we can lead the conversation, and then the conversation is healthier. When it becomes reactive, becomes stressful and emotional, and our brains don't function well under those settings. So I encourage educators to go and start learning and getting really formal with their knowledge of education of neuroscience, especially as it relates to instruction and their discipline.
Very good. Well said. Horatio, how could our listeners between now and June, how could they learn more about you? I know you have a website. It's a Resiliency. Is it resiliency.org or .com? There you
Resiliencyinc.com. But I am on every social media platform, most social media platforms, like not TikTok, but most social media platforms. And what I do is I actually on most days put out some kind of latest finding in neuroscience. So if you were to read my site, my stuff for 1 year, you'd probably get a good minor neuroscience course. If you really want to dig in, you could read one of my books. The one you mentioned, The Education Revolution, is about brain-based instruction. The Poverty Problem really talks about how you design education for kids coming from poverty, which is very different now than what you do for most kids in middle income or affluence. And the unlocking school bias really has to do with how the brain interacts with each other. And if people understand that, then they're able to improve their ability to get along with anybody.
Very good. Horatio, thank you for joining me today. I know how busy you are. Thank you for taking a few minutes to spend some time with us. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. I love Kentucky. Looking forward to being in it. I love any town that every time you go there, they talk about horse racing and bourbon.
Oh, you got it. In basketball, we talk a little bit about basketball too.
Oh, they don't talk it with me because I usually have Duke gear on, so nobody says anything.
Oh, good. It might not be safe for you to wear your Duke gear.
I was told that. Last time you guys gave me a Kentucky T-shirt to put on.
Yes, for your own safety. For your own
Yes.
safety. All right. Well, I want to remind all of our listeners again that Horatio will be headlining Central Kentucky EduCon on June 11th as the keynote speaker. If you'd like to come, check out ckec.org/educon to register. And with that, that wraps us up for another episode. Thanks again to Horacio Sanchez for joining me. I hope you have a great week, and we will see you next time on Advantage. Take care.